Alrighty, welcome to this discussion about harmful sexual behavior. I am Linda Smallbones, and I am working on a new project with some colleagues, Sandy Meyer, who's here with me today, and Lungi Makonza, who couldn't be with us today, but we are joined by Simone, who will introduce herself shortly. So I am a play therapist and social worker. I work with children and families, and I am really passionate about this whole area of inappropriate or harmful sexual behavior because we see that it's on the increase in South Africa and globally, and we're wanting to do something about it. And part of doing something about it is having conversations. And so that's why I have Simone here, who has a lot to offer, and Sandy also in practice has seen some things around this topic. And so this is going to be very informal, hopefully fun, hopefully informative. And yeah, Sands, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sandy. I'm an occupational therapist and play therapist. And yeah, I am part of the team and loving working with my colleagues on this very, very important topic that has often landed in my room, even as an OT, where it should not necessarily have emerged, but it has. And for me, I think my real passion and being part of the team is that so many professionals and teachers don't really know what to do when it comes into the room and don't know how to take it further, or are absolutely terrified or traumatized by it. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Okay. So I'm Simone, but everyone calls me Sim, so yeah, we can go with that. So I'm a social worker. I worked in child protection and got confronted with quite a lot of cases of harmful sexual behaviors. So I then did my master's in harmful sexual behaviors and then did play therapy and then studied forensic social work. So I feel like I've got like different angles in terms of harmful sexual behaviors. And so now my practice is really in forensics and then working therapeutically with children that sort of get referred for harmful sexual behaviors, whether they are the initiators or instigators or the victims or participants. Yeah, so sort of, and then the parent support as well with that.
Thanks. So just to frame our conversation a little bit today, so we're going to be referring to it as harmful sexual behaviors. It's also referred to as inappropriate sexual behaviors or problematic sexual behaviors. So we're going to be just defining that a little bit. And we're also going to be talking about what is the impact of a child's connection and attachment with their caregivers on the experience or the initiation of harmful sexual behaviors. Like, what is the link? And so that's really what we're going to look at a bit today. So if you're a caregiver, parent, or you're a teacher in a school, this will be relevant to you, I think. So if we just start, I'm going to use Hackett's definition just to define harmful sexual behaviors, because one of the problems with this whole area is that there isn't enough, especially there isn't enough South African literature on this topic. And as far as I know, and Sim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no South African definition of harmful sexual behavior.
Nothing. We all use Hackett.
Okay, so they are sexual behaviors expressed by children and young people under the age of 18 years old that are developmentally inappropriate, may be harmful towards self or others, or be abusive towards another child, young person, or adult. So there is, in this, really important to know that there's a continuum of behaviors. There's normal sexual behavior for children at developmentally appropriate levels. And there is like concerning behavior and problematic behavior, and then harmful or really abusive behavior. So we have this whole continuum. Yeah, Sim, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is like the continuum thing. I think we often forget that there's a normal, quote unquote side. We sort of jump to like concerning, problematic, harmful, but actually sexual development is a part of the developmental phases that kids sort of go through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so we are looking at how attachment and connection impacts that. So Sim, you had a really good way of expressing that whole attachment side. If you could just introduce that bit for us, that would be great.
Yeah, so for me, like I explained, so you have an attachment with your child, right? And we would love our parents to have secure attachments with their children. But then the incident happens, or the, sort of, it comes to light, and then your attachment to your child can stay the same, but your relationship with them might shift. And that for me is really important for us to keep in mind. I always think it's better if we use an example, but you've got like a mom with her kid, she loves her kid, she adores them, she's got a perception of her child. It comes out that her child was an instigator in an incident or involved in some sort of harmful sexual behaviors, acts. And then afterwards, she still loves her child, but her perception of the child is very different, because now she's starting to question everything that he's doing, sort of looking at his behavior through a certain lens. And that then shifts things. And that's really where we find most people's reaction to a harmful sexual behavior is to push out. And actually, what research tells us is we need to pull them in. Is that by them being on the outside, that can sometimes be the reason why they engage in this behavior in the first place, because they're looking for that connection. And then what we do is we just further like perpetuate the problem by being like, well, we're going to remove them out the school, or they're not allowed to play with their friends anymore, or they need to, they need to only be around adults. And then what that does is it just adds to the child's idea of, well, then where do I get connection from? Because when I looked for connection, I got into trouble, and I just got further pushed out in the first place. And
Yeah.
I think that's for me really where the difficulty comes in. And it's difficult for us as professionals, because we get sometimes these referral forms and we read them and we're like, whoa, what kind of child is coming into my room? And then the child that comes in looks like any other child, and they're loved and they're valued and they want you to delight in them. But then I think, like, if this is how I feel, I can imagine how other people must be perceiving the child and interacting with the child as well. And that's sometimes really difficult for us, as well, as we feel like if we're building a relationship with the child who maybe instigated this, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily condoning what they did, but we also have an understanding for why they did what they did. And that's difficult for us as professionals and as parents, and then as teachers and, parents of the other kids.
So do you think so you mentioned like an example of a child with a secure attachment still got involved in harmful sexual behavior.
Yeah.
So you see children, and let's just explore a little bit, like there are different types of attachment with caregivers, right? And
Yes.
Sansa, I don't know if you want to speak to this a little bit. That would be great.
Sure. Okay. So there's different ways to approach attachment, but I think the most
Mm.
well known is the 4 attachment patterns. And on the spot, sometimes I need reminding because I sometimes get.
No.
So the
Yeah.
very first one is we have the secure attachment,
Mm.
where the child and the parent, they have this beautiful like to and fro, and they repair and they rupture and they're kind of
Mm.
growing together. But there's kind of this healthy bondedness that's kind of
Mm.
happened. And yeah, like there is this very like the parent is happy to allow their child to go and explore, but they also really are available when they need to come and be nurtured and looked after and cared for. Then you have your more anxious attachment, and these are often where parents don't want their children to go too far away. They're quite anxious in terms of like their child going out or come and need them close and close by. And so those kind of anxious patterns, often the children don't feel like the world is safe enough to go out to explore. And so will remain like often stuck behind mum, and they almost like get an inherited anxiety that something bad is going to happen and they're going to jump out, and so they're very, very close, and often the parents feel very like needed by their children because they're
Yeah.
there to protect them from this big bad world. And then you've got your avoidant parents, where So often it's they will allow their parents to go, their kids to go out and explore, go see, go be part of. They're quite strong on independence, and they celebrate their children's like independence, and you did it by yourself, well done. And and often, you know, they celebrate the going out and being part of and exploring, but oftentimes the coming back and the nurturance piece can be really hard for them to kind of hold and to be vulnerable and to be open and to go, oh, that's really hard, and I feel, you know, disappointed and those kind of feelings. And then there is the last one, which we all don't want, is that that insecure, like that, and I'm going to need somebody to
Ambivalent.
thank you. Where
We'll get there together.
we will, thank you. And I think because I get so triggered by it, because it's an up and down attachment pattern where one
Hot
day,
and
well, one
cold,
moment it's hot and cold. One moment you're caring and you're loving, and the next moment you're a volcano and you're unpredictable. And so these little kiddos never know what they're going to get. They're kind of living in a space where they're almost anticipating all the time the potential for a disruption or an explosion or even it doesn't even have to be an explosion. It could be even passive aggression, just like ignoring. And it's just like overly, like there's this very, very nurturing piece, and then there's this not so it's like up and down, and they don't know where they stand. They're kind of insecure.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And just to acknowledge, we know that there are different models of attachment. This is just one of them that Sandy's speaking to, and which we will just use for today. There's two words that I think that are really important in discussing attachment of any type. One is a sense of safety, like our perception of safety, highly, highly important. And when we're in a secure attached relationship, the sense of safety, the neuroception or self-sense of safety is pretty strong. It's pretty good. You know, you can go out and come back and feel held and supported, whether you're out or whether you're back to your caregiver. And for me, that also like relates to connection. And I love using Brene Brown's definition of connection, which says the energy that exists between people where they feel seen, heard, valued. Like just like that is just so we all have a deep desire and need to feel seen and heard and valued. And when we feel safe with someone, likely those are the things that we're feeling and experiencing and being in relationship with them. And so connection, safety and connection are two just really important concepts within any attachment model. So if that exists, Simone, then my question is, then like why or how would a child, for example, initiate harmful sexual behavior if they're living with an attached relationship with caregivers?
Yeah, so for me, this is always like a thing of attachment is one element of it. So most of our research told us that children that, you know, engaged in harmful sexual behaviors had what we would call like a insecure attachment style. So whether that's anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. But then I started working and I actually got some kids that had quite secure attachment styles, and I got really confused then because that's not what the literature is telling me. But I think then it's about that connection and that relationship you've got. Children who maybe have a secure attachment with mom and dad, but aren't given the opportunity to ask questions about sexual development, then might go to other sources for information, and then harmful sexual behaviors comes into play. So, you know, you've got a kid who, so if we take like an anxious attachment style, it's this thing of, I don't know what, like mom is not like consistent in terms of what she's doing with the anxiety. So I am anxious, and the only way I can regulate then is by trying to connect with somebody else. And then that person and I end up taking it to a place where it's not developmentally appropriate anymore. Similarly with avoidant, I'm dismissed. So like Sandy said, you've got these feelings and the independence is so celebrated, but when you need help, it's like your feelings are dismissed. So then I'm going to go to somebody else who's going to accept my feelings. And then I'm going to go there. And similarly with disorganized, I don't know what to expect. I haven't had a relationship model to me. So this is what I then think a relationship should be based on that. But the
Yeah.
secure attachment is often overlooked. We tend to go, the parents must not be involved. The mom and dad must be exposing them to something, or the child's not being supervised. And those are all factors that can contribute. But a secure attachment doesn't mean that you're having the conversations with your child that you need to have. And
Yeah.
that's where this comes in, where you've got kids that go, oh, my mom, when I brought it up, my mom said I'm too young to ask those questions. So then I went onto Google and I Googled it, and that's how I came across X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And we don't take that into, but then I say the healing happens then within the relationship as well,
Yeah.
not in
And then,
isolation.
so I hear you, and I also have a mom that I've worked with who's done the talks from a young age, from 3, 4 years old, like from a young age, talked about her body because of mom's own experience in her childhood
Yeah.
of inappropriate sexual behavior, acted up upon her. She's done the work. At 5 years old, her child was there was harmful sexual behavior acted upon the child by a 10-year-old. So, so within a secure attached relationship, the conversations have been had. So I just want to add that there's lots of elements, but another key element in this is power and control. And
Yeah.
like we try and teach our children to say no. It's not always the effective. It may be one small part of it that we I don't know that we can say it's okay to say no because it is, but when your no is not heard, or when you don't feel like you 5 and the other person's 10 and you look up to them and you don't feel like you can say no.
No,
They're bigger,
I
they're
think that's
stronger, they're cooler than you. I don't know.
yes,
You
but we
just
place so much pressure on children to say no.
yeah.
This is a statistic that I love pulling out. So if you've got 100 cases of child sexual abuse in front of you, okay, 100 cases in front of you, 2 of those cases is going to be the stranger on the corner with the trench coat. 2%
Yeah.
of our child sexual abuse cases are perpetrated by somebody random and unknown. But what do we
Yeah.
teach the kids? Don't go to the guy with the sweets. Don't jump into the car with the strange lady. But that's 2%, 2 of those cases. Then
Yeah.
you would
Yeah.
get 48% would be by family, biological family, like moms and dads and uncles and aunts. They would be 48%. You would then have 7%, which is by step family, and then 43%. So your second biggest group would be 18 years and younger. Like
Yeah.
that's the stats in South Africa. But
Yeah.
we then when we tell kids to say no, we always talk about the grown up or when the when the scary person comes to talk to you. But like you say, it's sometimes the kids on the playground, and
Mm.
we don't actually and I don't think we found a balance yet where we say to kids, we say if somebody wants to look at your body, say no. But then the doctor asks and we say that's okay. Or the teacher needs to help you change your clothes and we don't put like we don't want to give the kids the exceptions because we feel we'll overwhelm them. But then you've got a 10-year-old on the playground who goes up to the 5-year-old and says, let's play a game. And it's fun because we have this idea that harmful
Yeah.
sexual behaviors is like forcing or negative, but sometimes it's fun. And we're also forgetting
Yeah.
the part that sometimes in your body, it feels nice. There's a physiological response that happens. And so
Yeah.
we tell kids, if you ever feel unsafe or if you ever feel scared, but sometimes the kid doesn't feel scared.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then the kid's like, and then I say to parents, but if your child comes and tells you, that's still a positive thing. They felt safe enough to come and tell you. They might not have told you right away, but
Mm.
we also don't expect adults to come and tell us right away. So I don't know why
Mm.
we put that pressure on children.
And like you're saying, they've got to work through quite a lot of
Yes.
confusion before they go like, is this something I need to talk about with my mum?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially then we go like we as humans we often downplay stuff as well. So we're like, was it really that bad? What
Mm.
happened? Because it didn't
Mm.
feel bad. It felt
Mm.
actually quite nice. Or
Yeah.
oh, but everybody else was playing the game. So if everybody else is playing, maybe it's okay.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's what you're talking about, that power and control. We are so quick to acknowledge it with an old, like a much like an adult and children, but we forget that within children relationships, there's an element of power and control as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you think around context as well. Like, so when it's
Yeah.
in a place where we are playing and it is fun, it's contextually like it's confusing because their perspective is shifted because they're in play mode and they're in the context of the playground. It's not in a dark room, you
No.
know, or a dodgy corner. It's in a
Mm.
fairly safe space where
Mm.
like where I'm every day, and it's yeah. So I think it's a very good, like, it's important to go like, well, what
Mm.
was going on around them? Nobody
Mm.
else, it wasn't like there were red flags for them either. Nobody said, oh, you shouldn't be
Mm.
going there or doing that. It was part of that situation.
Mm.
And if it's a game, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And if it's a game, I'm told to play with others. That's what I'm told. You've got to play with others. You've got to, give each other turns. So and I'm not saying that we need to change our language with that, but we also need to understand our filing systems as adults. We've got much bigger filing systems. We're looking at these things from a specific viewpoint and especially as professionals with a certain knowledge. Kids don't
Mm.
have that knowledge.
Yeah.
I always think there's, that documentary Dragon's Lair about Lucy Woods, who was sexually abused by her stepdad for 10 years. And she says the first time the word abuse had ever been used was when other professionals got involved. She'd never heard the word abuse before that. And for some of these kids as well, they've never heard that what they're doing is unsafe or that what they're doing is wrong. They've never had that. They've never had somebody say that to them until other people got involved. And then, Linda, like you said, it's really confusing because then, so can I trust myself then? Because I thought it was okay, but people are telling me it wasn't okay. And that's then what we were talking about like earlier with the shame thing then comes in. It's
Mm.
like, I don't know what to trust or what to believe anymore.
Can we talk about that? Because then I feel like attachment and connection come under pressure, and you've already alluded to this, Sim, but they come severely under pressure when there's been a disclosure or when the harmful sexual behavior gets found out, whether the child is the initiator of it or whether they've been like acted upon. Um, Parents can understandably like lose it. That it's like it's horrifying. It's shaming. It's excruciatingly embarrassing. It's uncomfortable, particularly if you haven't thought about or had the courage, maybe for good reasons, to have conversations with your child about their body. Like maybe it's a whole area that you've been avoiding, and then it comes like in your face and you can't avoid it. And so parents have different ways of dealing with it. Sometimes it is disciplining and punishing,
Yeah.
um, which causes further shame and causes actually disconnection. Um, and sometimes it's going into, maybe they go into a period of mourning or and isolation because of the shame, or we're not going to talk about it, you know,
Yeah.
which where does that leave the child? Um, so I just also from Brene Brown and their research is like disconnection, the pain of disconnection feels as real as physical pain in the body. And I think like almost nowhere more so than in these kind of scenarios. Yeah.
I think that's the the struggle is that there's no handbook on how to handle this. We've got best practices, but a lot of people aren't aware of the best practices. So what
Mm.
happens is a child comes and tells you something and you freak, rightfully so, because you're confronted with this information. You then react in a certain way, and then you don't know what to do. So
Mm.
sometimes what happens is with the parents, when I've seen some kids, it's more about the way that mom and dad reacted that was upsetting
Yeah.
for them than the actual
Yeah.
incident that happened. Because the incident
Yeah.
was fun, it felt good, I liked it. And now mom and dad are telling me I'm dirty and I'm bad and I'm, naughty. And so now I'm taking that, and that's where I'm struggling.
Mm.
But then I think it's about us having conversations with the grown-ups around the child, is to say to them, you might have not reacted the way you want to, but this is an opportunity then for you to go and repair it. Is to say to the kid, like, what you told me when you told mom really freaked out because
Mm.
that was so much information, and I didn't even know what to think. And so I screamed, and I'm really sorry because now that I've had time to think about it, I'm really sorry that I reacted the way I did. And then you've got a chance to model to your kid, like, I made a mistake and I'm in it with you.
Yeah.
But I think that period of mourning and everything comes back to then about pulling people in. If you're at a school and your kid is the instigator of this and the school sort of like pushes you out, you feel really alone. And then you tend to act out because you feel you're so desperate for connection and you feel so like there's no justice. So you fight harder against it. When actually, what we need to do is we need to pull everybody sort of into it and have a conversation. And that's why part of my, sort of advice to people is you can focus on the 2 or 3 kids that were involved, but actually you need to focus on a grade thing now. You need to have like a
Yeah.
bigger thing. You need to have a conversation with all parents about their relationship with children. And we were talking about having the conversations. She had the conversation with that, child that was 5 when she was 3 and 4. But a lot of us, even myself, we still think of sexual education as happening when kids are 12 or 13.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
know kids are starting much earlier with that.
Mm.
And then the connection for me also is about going, who do you connect with that's going to be able to support you to connect to your child? And that's when like the therapy comes in, having somebody who can help you and your child work through these things
Yeah.
because it's about the relationship. Ultimately, that's what it always comes down to.
Yeah. Sans, did you have something you wanted
So
to add
I
there?
was just going to say, like, I just so agree with you, Sim, like around those conversations to have with our children. And it's not a once-off conversation. It needs to happen at every developmental stage because
Mm.
it's growing, it's changing. So
Yeah.
what you say to your 4 or 5-year-old, you got to say again in a different way, maybe some more, maybe some less. I don't know, however,
Mm.
at the next stage. And this includes kids with neurodiversities where you think, oh, they're never going to do this or they're never going to understand. You have to, have to, have to. And and I was actually just looking for some resources for a parent. It was quite interesting because we kind of had like very weighted to too young, and then it was like bits and bobs, and then there was like way too much like for a teenager. And we actually sometimes there's a need for parents to kind of get in there and look and see what is their child needing to know now for this stage, and being able to take some of that and maybe with some guidance to what is appropriate, because it's very, very blurry out there as to what is appropriate for an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old. It's not so clear cut. And also it depends on where you are as well. So like a 10-year-old in the city versus a 10-year-old out in rural context can very, very widely. So context is just as important as well, again, with just like how much information these kids are getting. And
And the relationship then that you could talk, there was, I mean, we can go on a tangent about this, but there's such a big push to use the anatomically correct words with your child, right? Huge push for it. But we don't use anatomically correct words with our children because we call it a vagina and it should be called a vulva. So we're automatically not anatomically correct with our wording. But then I say to parents, it's the conversation that you have. Your kid's going to pick up whether or not you're okay with using the certain words or whatever it is that you're using. So you can have a conversation with your 5-year-old and your kid can then ask you a question and then you react by going, well, you're too young to know that. Immediately, then all the work that you've put in is now like disregarded because your kid's like, whoa, so I can talk about some things, but not other things. And we also don't know what our kids are going to be exposed to. Like Sandy was saying about context and having it at every developmental stage. Your grade 6s and 7s might be on, the playground with your grade 3s and 4s. They had the sex talk. They're then talking about it at a break, and a kid walks past and hears something and thinks, what's that? They go home and ask mom and dad about it. You weren't planning on having that conversation, but now your kid overheard it, and now you have to have a conversation about what that means. Similarly, in South Africa, you're driving, in the car on the radio, and they mention the word rape. You didn't want to teach your kid about that, but now your kid's asking you about it, and you can't say to your kid, well, we can't talk about it. You now have to navigate that. And that's why, Sandy, then you also have to be able to think. You can also say to your kid, and I love saying to parents, you can use the words, I don't know. I don't know how to explain this to you yet, but I'm going to go think about it, and then I'm going to come and chat to you.
I was
Or I
going to
don't know how
say,
to answer, so I'm going
yeah,
to Google. I don't know what that means either. I'm going to go look, and then I'm going to come teach you.
yeah, I was going to say, like, I don't think that we have to rush giving kids answers in the moment. And we can say, like, that's a really important conversation and a really important question. And I'm glad you've asked, even if we're not. and just and say like, let's plan a time when we can chat about that. And I just I want to have a good answer for you. And right now, like we're driving in the car, I don't have a good answer for you. I know it in my head, but it's my adult head, and I want to explain it in a way that you're going to understand at your age. So just I don't think we have to like rush into things or panic. Like we can take a bit of a step and say like, I'm going to answer your question. It's just a matter of when we get to it, and like don't leave it for a year or like try and do it and within a few days or whatever. But I am a huge believer in books, like in using books. There's so many beautiful resources out there. Um, Christy Herselman from the chat, and she's based in Durban. She has beautiful books that you can use. So it's nice that there's some South African resources. Jelly Beans have some resources as well. Like I'm a huge believer in sitting side by side with your child and reading a book together. And in fact, that was the push factor for me when I've got a son and a daughter. My son is older. He was going to grade 1, and I thought, I don't know who he's going to be on the playground with. Like in grade R, I knew all the kids in the little pre-primary school. But I don't know who he's going to be on the playground with. I don't want them to hear about sex. So I did it with them together because they're so close in age. But like, and I used a book, and that was fine at that age. And I say to parents, you don't even have to use the word sex at that age. That can come later. It's more about explaining a relationship of love and explaining that there's a context for that relationship to kind of take place. So I do think we have to try and get ahead of it a little bit, but sometimes when they ask questions that we're not ready to answer. So what do you do, like, if they've heard, say, they're 7 and they've heard about oral sex on the playground and you don't feel like they're ready, like what would you do? Like what would you say to your kid? Because I really like for me, I'm thinking about that now on the spot, but like I don't think a 7-year-old is ready to hear about oral sex.
Yeah. So for me, it's always then about, I explain to kids that there's different kinds of sex. And I do think, oral sex is something that we always talk about sex as being like male and female, and we can get into the whole, context of everything. But some parents don't actually know some of the slang terms for what kids are using. They don't know. So then I'll say something to them and they'll be like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that means this. And they're like, I didn't know that. So I say to parents, I'm not asking you to become an expert in terms of sexual education. That's not what I'm asking at all. But what I am asking you to do is, if you can find resources that you can use to read about it. So I love the book. It was originally called Let's Talk About Sex. I think it's now called It's Not the Stalk. And it's by Robbie H. Hogan. And it's a very comprehensive book. Like it's quite a thick book and it's got beautiful illustrations and stuff. But that sort of goes through things like identity, HIV, contraception. So read that and see the language that they use and then apply to your kid. When I've had kids ask me about oral sex, I'll sometimes say to them, like, I know what it is, but I'm wondering if you would maybe like to ask mom and dad so that they can explain it to you. And then I will tell the parents afterwards, like, listen, Susie had a question about oral sex. I've told her that I'm going to talk to you about it. And then if the parents ask me how to explain it, I say to them, the way that I would explain it is you get different kinds of sex. The sex that most people talk about is what I already told you about, where there's a mom and a dad or a man and a woman, however they explained it. I said, but then you can tell them that there's different kinds of sex. And then they'll might ask you, like, what other kinds of sex can you get? And you'll be like, well, I really just want to focus on the one that you've asked about now, because it's a lot of information. And when you're talking about oral sex, that's where people use their private parts and their mouths to have sex. And kids then get a bit confused, and you've got to deal with that confusion. But it's just, for me, it's about helping them understand that there's different kinds of sex. So when they hear another sex, they can then come and ask you about it. Like, Mom, I heard about a different kind. What do I do now? And then you can have, but Linda, what you're highlighting is the relationship that you created. You created a relationship with your children where you went, if you've got questions, you can come and ask me. And if your 7-year-old asked you and you were like, oh, I don't really know how to answer that, I'm going to go think about it a little bit. You can come back to them and say to them, like, you know what, the type of sex you're asking about is actually for people that are much older, just like other sex. And I'm still struggling with figuring out how to teach you about it. And then you can go and read, like I said, the book. I really love that book, and read about it and see how they explain it. I think at one point they say in their book something about sex can involve, and then they give you like the different kinds of body parts. But then I love the sentence that they use at the end of it, which is that sex comes with complicated feelings. And I always love that idea that we can have complicated feelings about sex and complicated feelings about talking about sex, that it doesn't necessarily need to be like a good or a bad thing. It can be a complicated thing. And relationships are complicated. So I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And in these days, we also have the other complication of like non-contact sex, where children are coerced into sexual behaviors and recorded or videoed, and there's many different ways in which that is happening, and it's a non-contact sexual abuse that's happening. And so often children don't necessarily classify that as dangerous or harmful or anything, because it's not actually, there's no one else in the room except for them and a phone that's going out onto the internet. So
But Sandy, what you're saying now, like I remember my mom doing sexual education, and I always laugh because I think because of the field I'm in, people must think that I grew up quite liberal with the family, but we grew up very conservative. Like the sex conversations was very much had, and I'm very grateful to my parents for it. But they never had to have a conversation with me about sexting or sending images because there was no cell phone when I was growing up. Like that was not a thing. Whereas now you've got kids that are engaging in Snapchat and Be Reals, and they're on like Blue Sky. And so they've got all these new apps. And then we're still teaching them about like sex where there's a man and a woman and they're in a bed. And that's actually sometimes not even what's shown on, in terms of what they're interacting with. And so I think then also for me, if we think about a relationship, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you want to know a lot about their world. And that's sometimes for me also a gap that parents have, or caregivers or teachers, is we're not very clued up on what the child's world is like.
Yeah.
When children get apps or when they are watching something, we're like, oh, I don't have time to do that. But you actually need to ask them about it, ask them about the conversations that they're having, the TV shows that they're watching, the music that they're listening to, the apps that they're using, because that's their world. And then that's also going to teach you what you might need to have conversations about.
It's interesting because I've got my children are now 14 and 15. And so we ask about the slang and we ask it like, what does that word mean? And they're like, I can't tell you. So they're having all that like stuff going on in their head. Like I cannot tell my mother what this means. I'm like, don't make me Google it. Please don't make me Google it.
But look at the way you're talking about it. It's fun. It's lighthearted. We can laugh about it. You're not dismissing it. You're still, and if like my mother has a very big problem with the fact that we all swear in our family. We all sort of use it as like a noun, a verb, and an adjective. My mom's like, I can't believe you guys are having these conversations. But I say to my mom, like, Mom, that was your time. This is our time now. And then the other day I heard like my much younger sister swearing, and I was like, you are far too young to be using this language. But she's 18. She can use that language. She can do what she wants with it. But again, like having a laugh and a conversation of going like, wow, you're like acting very different from how I acted. Help me understand what's going on in your world. Help me understand what was going on when Susie asked you to play this game. I'm just trying to, I use that help me understand a lot with kids in my room.
Yeah.
Is I say to them, like, help me understand. So you and him were playing doctor, doctor. And then what was the next step? And they're like, well, then, he said that he saw his mom have a baby and she had to take off all her clothes when she gave birth to the baby. Okay, so then you took your clothes off. Yeah, because I was having a baby, Auntie Sim. Like, I was playing that I was having a baby, so I had to take my clothes off because that's how people have babies. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, no wonder mom freaked out when she walked into the room because you were naked and he was in between your legs. But actually, what was going on is really just about, we need to have a parent come and explain to the kids and talk to them about that's real. When we pretend, we keep our clothes on. And then it's about the relationship again, that the kid goes like, okay, I made a mistake, but I'm still loved. I'm still wanted. I'm not being pushed out and getting like, shoved to the side.
Yeah. So we really could talk about this all day. And I think we just need to, for now, we need to kind of start drawing to a conclusion. The other thing I wanted to say about connection and attached relationships is you can always work on them. For caregivers, for those of us who've had ruptures, like there's been a blow up or we've lost it, there's always repair. Like there's always the hope to reconnect. It takes work. It's hard. but there is always that possibility. So for people watching who think like, flip, I've messed up, I believe that there's always, and sometimes depending on what's happened, it might take a little bit of professional help. It might take some help from the family. Don't be scared to ask for help, even though it can be feel really, really, really vulnerable. But you can shift and change over time. And I've seen that happening in my practice, and I'm sure you ladies have seen that too. So we can always work on connection. And it's still not too late. Even if your child's a teenager, I don't think it's too late to try to have some conversations with them about, like you said, some what's going on in their world. Mine feels super awkward. Just name it, you know? Sometimes it's hard for mums to talk to their teenage sons. Sometimes it's hard for dads to talk to their teenage daughters. It's awkward. I've got a book on good, bad, and secret touching, and it talks about the adult reading this book with you. Check if they have a purple face, like check if they're embarrassed, and it's just so. I think that's a huge strength, is to be able to name like, oh, this feels like a little bit awkward, but we're going to talk about it anyway because it's so important. Um, and the other thing I wanted to say about connection is that when you have a connected relationship, doesn't mean perfect, just means connected. Um, it's protective for the child. So it's protective in terms of preventing abuse of different types from happening. It's preventative in terms of just them developing healthy relationships with other people in the world and with their own bodies. Um, and it, like we've talked about, it sets the stage for being able to have all sorts of conversations when we're in connection. So it's hugely, hugely protective. So if you're feeling like attachment or connection is not great, it's always worth working on. Yeah, so I just felt like that was is kind of like my piece that I'm always saying that I just wanted to lay on the table. And I don't know if you each want to just close with a couple of um, nuggets for you, or things that you haven't said yet, or yeah,
Um,
advice for
for
caregivers
me,
and parents. Yeah.
yeah, I think for me that thing of like what you were saying, it doesn't need to be perfect. And I think we
Mm,
put so much pressure on ourselves to feel like we have to know it all. And
mm.
actually, even when you do know it all, something else will come up and then you've got to learn it all over again.
Yes.
And that's okay to you know to have a bit of grace with yourself and be like, I actually didn't know this. And or when the kid asked something and you gave them the wrong information, to say to them, like, you know what, I actually went and I thought about it more and I was actually wrong. And to model that to them. And then to also think about the fact, and maybe this is just somebody needs to hear it, that there is no one thing that's going to cause this. It's a multitude of factors. And
Yeah.
so to put so much pressure on yourself to think I could have done something more to prevent it,
Mm,
it might only
mm,
be one factor of that. You know, we know supervision is one thing, a relationship is one thing, but there's many other things that could be going on. And so I always say to parents, the fact that you are coming to see me, whether that's me or another professional or another parent, the fact that you're asking for help is actually really brave. And your kid was coming to you, which was also really brave. And we're trying to navigate this together. And
mm,
then I think of it as being like, it's not just a them and me or a child and parent. It's actually like a, we all need to take responsibility for it.
mm.
And that's really by having conversations like this, we're raising awareness to then allow people to see it's happening more often than we think, which we
Yeah.
don't want. You know, I always say we're working in a profession where we're trying to work ourselves out of a job all the time. We wish we don't get
Yeah.
referrals. We wish we don't, you know, I think we're the only ones that are like, I hope nobody is,
Mm,
you know, getting hurt or involved in something this month. But I think that's important for us to think about, is that you're not alone in it.
mm.
And it might take you a bit of time to find somebody you gel with, or the way that they speak that you might like, but you can find somebody that's going to be able to support you with it. You don't have to do it just you and your child alone. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be like that.
Yeah. Thanks, yeah.
I think for me, I would just encourage us to slow down, take time, connect, disconnect from all the things that pull us away, so that you get nuggets of time, because they're not only important for our kids, but they are actually really important for us in our parenting journey. And yes, we have a very hard discussion that we're talking about, but sometimes these moments actually allow us to heal as parents as well. So if we rush through, and we never want this to be a conversation or be a thing that happens, but if it does happen, sometimes it's actually a moment for everyone to heal. And if we hone in and focus in and make it, we're going to fix this problem and fix our kid, we can lose sight of the healing that we get to get as parents as well, the gift that that pain brings to us. And also, sometimes we get so focused in on fixing that problem and making sure we heal this thing in their in your child. You actually sometimes you don't see the rest of your child and
Yeah.
how they the rest of the parts that fit into the family. So
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
my little last moment.
Yeah, thank you. Like this is if your child's been involved in this type of behavior, as especially as the initiator, like this doesn't define the whole of them. You know, this is a part of their life that they are wondering about or struggling with, or, you know, and so it is our job, like you said, Sim, to get curious about context and what's going on. Yeah. Um, ladies, just thank you so much for being here. I think that the other word that I had as you were speaking, Sans, was just joy. And I think as practitioners working in this work, like it can be so serious, and it is serious, and it is heartbreaking, like really, really heartbreaking at times. But I think finding places for joy and finding places for our own connections. I'm speaking to caregivers as well. Like, if you're in the middle of this, like, find spaces where you can connect and, like, find someone that you can talk to, whether they're a friend or a professional. There's different ways of getting help and getting healing, and definitely don't be in it on your own. Yeah. So thank you. Definitely doing this again, ladies. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynn.